I'm Nicole Ozer. I'm the Technology and Civil Liberties Policy Director at the ACLU of Northern California, and I got a great segue from Anne, because I'm really going to be talking about the context and the purpose for how individuals, organizations, researchers are actually using the technology that's available nowadays, and how to really mitigate the risks that might exist in terms of the third party and the data ecosystem. So I don't have to tell anyone in this room how technology tools have really become an increasingly important way to connect and communicate and mobilize all sorts of communities about sexuality and health. Actually, can I get my slides up? Oh, I think they went up too. They went up and then they came down.
They disappeared.
You know,
it's okay.
Technology lawyers always have this problem. It's like the bane of our existence. So I'm actually here today because, while many people in this audience are using new technology, as a specialized lawyer at the ACLU, it's really my job to sort of get behind the scenes and look at some of the privacy and free speech implications of this technology, and really talk to the public, to organizations and to researchers about some of the more hidden costs that might be related to some of these tools. And in the past year, Deb and I have been starting to interact more, and other folks in this community, about some of the issues and some of the sort of data ecosystem and how these issues are involved. So I have 15 minutes today. I know there are probably going to be a lot of follow-up questions, but I wanted to sort of take a few minutes today to talk about sort of the data ecosystem more generally in terms of what really happens to data that's out there. Anne talked about how many people are using social networking, how many people are texting, and sort of what happens when you log off to all that data, all those status updates, all that location data, all those text messages. Also talking about how we can really identify some of the benefits of this technology, but also think strategically about what type of technology is appropriate for particular uses. Deb talked a little bit like, of course nobody is texting about, private porn or sexting or health information. And, technology is not neutral. There's technology that's good for certain purposes, and then there's also issues related to certain technology that may not make it appropriate in every circumstance for every type of purpose. And then also talk about some steps that individuals can take, as well as organizations, developers, and also researchers to try and mitigate this risk. Because a lot of us are dealing with tools that we're not producing ourselves as individuals. We're not coding those apps as researchers. We're not developing those platforms. We're actually relying on privately owned platforms, whether it be Facebook, whether it be our cell phone provider, whether it be YouTube or Flickr or anything else, Google, that we're using. And those companies are in the business of making money. And there's a lot going on behind the scenes in terms of what kind of data is being collected and how it's being used that may not make it appropriate for every use, or you may want to take steps to make sure that you're not creating platforms or services that actually put the communities of the young people that you're working with at risk, that you're trying to help. So a couple of slides here. This is actually from the recent Federal Trade Commission privacy report that was just released last week, where we talk a lot about sort of how much data is really being collected. So as we've moved from the paper to the digital world, there's lots and lots of data out there. Massive amounts of data are being collected by many different kinds of entities. You've got the telecommunications and mobile companies here, you've got the internet companies, but you've also got government agencies, the public, researchers who are interested in this kind of data. So there's a huge amount of data being collected about who you are, where you go, who you know, and what you do. And that's just a reality of our new digital life, that paper files used to be sort of stuffed away in some filing cabinet that most people didn't access. And now there's the capacity to collect massive amounts of data, to retain it for long, long periods of time. And once it's been collected, it's very, very mobile. It's very fluid, and it can move to a lot of different places. Data that's collected by a certain company or by a certain entity doesn't necessarily just stay with that entity. It's easy to combine, and of course the companies who are in the business of making money, not in the business of delivering health information, have a great incentive to retain this information, to combine it with other things. Some of you may use Google, and you are aware that there was a new privacy policy about Google being able to combine a lot of data together that previously had been separated. And these companies do a lot with this data. They may sell it to data brokers. They may use it for targeted advertising, or it may flow to third parties, including law enforcement, the government, and other public entities. And so that's sort of increasingly happening. In terms of a case study, how many of you are on Facebook? You have a Facebook account, right? And how many of you utilize Facebook sort of for your organization? Like you have a page on Facebook. So a lot of us. And some of you may even have a like button on your website. So somebody can go to your organization's website or your new project and say, I like this. They don't even have to find you on Facebook. They can just find you on your website and automatically like you on Facebook. Or some of you may even have developed a Facebook app. So an application on Facebook that enables someone to sort of communicate and connect with you even more through the Facebook platform. So to give a sense of sort of some of this data collection that's happening through a platform like Facebook, in Europe, there's a law that allows Europeans to get access to information about them that's been collected by companies. And there was a law student, a 24-year-old law student, who last year used this little-known law to ask Facebook to turn over his data files for him to get a sense of how much information had been collected about him from Facebook. He had been on Facebook since 2008, and Facebook had over 1,200 pages of his data, including every page or website he had ever liked, whether that's ISIS or any other health organization, everyone he had ever friended or defriended, every Facebook event he'd ever been invited to, like a conference or a talk by a certain organization, every past message and chat that he had done through Facebook, even those that he had tried to delete. So this just gives you a sense of how much is out there about the things that we're communicating, who we're connecting with, what our interests are in terms of health interests or sexuality interests, that all of this data it's not just staying with the people that we're communicating with or staying with the organizations that we're supporting. When we're using some of these platforms and services, it's going through an entire process that's irrespective of who we're working with. And it can be available to a wide range of people. A couple of years ago, we received a very sad phone call. There was a Stanford student who was a fan of an LGBT group on Facebook through the campus, because that's the way that it communicated to students about events that were happening and activities that were happening. He had all of his fan pages private. So he kept it private that he was a fan of this LGBT group. He kept it private that he was a fan of certain types of health information on campus. But when Facebook changed its privacy settings and removed the privacy settings for fan pages, he was outed to his small town in the South about his sexuality. And this had a real impact on his personal life. So, these things can be really accessible to people that you may not want to know all of this information. The second part that a lot of people don't realize is, let's say you are a friend or a fan or liked a certain health organization or sexuality organization or a political issue related to these kinds of information. And let's say your friend runs an app. What we've termed the app gap is an example of this, that Facebook, if you're friends with somebody, any information that your friends can see, any app that they run, you can access that information to. So let's say I'm a friend or a fan of ISIS, and my 14-year-old nephew runs a Facebook app or quiz about, what would the fairy princess most look like, you know, if, whatever it is on Facebook. That random app can access a lot of this information that might be very personal. And as you see here, this is from Facebook's privacy policy. You have to go into these settings. How many of you have ever seen this setting who are on Facebook? My sister's seen it because I made her do it. But you actually have to go into these settings and tell Facebook that if a friend runs an app, you don't want them to be able to access things like your interests, your religious and political views, your family and relationships, all sorts of really sensitive information. And so not only can information potentially be flowing you know, to the public if you don't understand your settings, they can be flowing to random third-party apps that you don't know potentially what their privacy policies are. You've never even used this application. The other thing where we're doing a lot of work, and of course there was a great example of this in the intro video, is just how much mobile is being used to connect and communicate about all sorts of issues, including sexuality and health. And many people are using mobile, whether it be text messaging, whether it be mobile apps, to try and communicate about this. And mobile is an amazing way to do this. It's really an increasingly essential way, as people don't have home phones, as many people don't use email anymore, as sort of we've been bombarded with so much information that it's maybe we don't go to websites anymore either. So mobile is really essential, but mobile is also a huge data ecosystem. So while you may be texting, you know, with a particular entity, there are all these different folks who may be getting data about your location, about your phone activities. You know, you've got your location providers, whether it be Google, you've got your wireless carrier like AT&T and Sprint and Verizon. You've got third-party websites that you're looking at. You've got the apps. There's sort of data flowing all over the place. And so this is really an important issue. If you're an individual who's looking at health information on your phone, you're an organization that's developing an app, you're a researcher that's using this service, it's really important to figure out if you're hiring consultants, if you're hiring app developers, if you're using these services, you know, who else is potentially getting access to that mobile phone number, which, as the video said, you know, is kind of your, you know, social security number for the future. Where else is all this data flowing, and what's happening to it? Because it's who you are, it's where you've gone in the world. All our phones know that we're here right now, and this is really sensitive data. So in terms of some recent revelations to kind of give a sense of sort of what's happening in the location space, Deb mentioned that I was really involved with sort of the Apple story breaking about how location data was flowing from our phones back to Apple. So Apple, it was revealed last summer, had been sending a year of location data back to the company. So here I am using my iPhone, happily going about my world, and it turns out that there's a file stored on my phone that keeps detailed records of all of the cell towers that I've been near for the past year, and that's going back to Apple. That tells a lot about whether I've gone to certain events, whether I've gone to certain, you know, doctors, whether I've been to certain clinics, whether I've been to certain types of activities. It can tell a lot about me. And the ACLU actually did a Public Records Act request in 32 states to try and get some information about how often location information is being retained and how it's used. And it's not revealed in the privacy policies of these companies, but Apple has actually been storing location data on every Apple user since July 2008. It knows where I've been since July 2008, even if I don't remember. And if you don't use Apple, you're not out of the woods. You'll see the time frames for Verizon, T-Mobile, and Sprint. Those with HTC phones might have been interested in the story earlier this year that there were mobile analytics pre-installed on those phones that could intercept and store all phone activities. So whatever you were doing on your phone, if you thought you were communicating through a secure system, who knows? And that PAC, which was a social networking app, was actually vacuuming up all the address books, so all the contacts and people that you knew. So in terms of, I don't want to totally freak people out. But you know, there are some potential harms here with sort of public knowledge of issues. As I mentioned, you know, what we heard with people who think that their Facebook settings are set a certain way, or that Facebook settings change and things become public that they would never want to become public. Adverse decisions being made about people based on the types of information that they may be communicating and connecting with online that then can be used in ways that they didn't intend. There was a recent Microsoft study that 70% of HR professionals in the United States have rejected candidates based on information that they found about them online, including things that they felt they didn't have proper lifestyles, which can be all sorts of things. And then in this past couple weeks, there's been a lot of stories that we've been involved with at the ACLU about this very alarming trend of employers trying to force potential employees and current employees to actually log onto their Facebook account and share information about the types of things that they've done on Facebook, the types of things they like, the kind of photos that they post. And in terms of the government, you know, I work at the ACLU, and one of our major focuses always is about ensuring that our private lives can stay private, and that the government isn't snooping into what should be our private lives. And there is a huge amount of government demands going on right now about data that's being collected by companies. There's very little reporting overall about how often the government is getting data collected by companies, but Google is one of the few companies that actually does some limited reporting about this issue. And they reported this summer that the requests from the government for information collected by Google, whether that be searches or emails, you name it, is up 29% just in the past 6-month period. As mentioned, location information and how much of that is being collected. Sprint received over 8 million demands for location information in just a single year period in 2009. And the ACLU just did this Public Records Act request where we found that we surveyed and requested data from over 200 police departments in 32 states, and the majority of them did not go to a judge and get a warrant before getting access to location information. Questions like the Michigan police demanding all the phone information of the people that were at a planned protest. So, you know, these are really scary things in terms of being able to engage about these issues and make sure that private details about our lives, our interests, our sexuality, our health concerns stay private to us and not accessible by people who shouldn't know these things. The reason why we've sort of got some of this Wild West in terms of data flow is that we have all this cutting edge technology, but the privacy laws haven't been updated since really before most of this technology existed. This nice gentleman is one of the creators of the mobile phone. And the law that controls the government being able to access data collected by companies hasn't been updated since 1986, before the web existed. And the United States doesn't have the kind of comprehensive sort of data protection initiatives like the European Union has. Although we're seeing a lot of movement in this past year on that issue. Some of you may have seen the recent report from the White House about a consumer bill of rights, about the Federal Trade Commission, and there's been over a dozen pieces of legislation introduced in just this past year, much of which I'm involved with. So, you know, technology's fabulous. I use it. I'm not a Luddite. I don't want to give it up. But I also feel like there are ways that we should be smart about how we use it and take steps to mitigate the risks and to make sure that we are knowing our technology and making sure it's actually appropriate for the circumstances that we're trying to use it for, that we are baking in safeguards whenever possible, and that we're also educating users about the kinds of steps that they can take to protect themselves while we're encouraging them to like us on Facebook or to sign up for our text messaging service. If not, we're really potentially doing a disservice because it may come back to harm them down the line. And also, the reality is that we shouldn't have to choose between using great new technologies to connect and communicate and educate. We should have updated laws so we don't have to be making those choices, and that's a lot of the work that we're doing at the ACLU to make sure that these laws are not as old as that man in the picture, and that we're able to use these things safely and in a way that makes sense for everybody. So we'll be out afterwards. I produced a piece this past year for nonprofits who are building apps on some real steps that they can take to bake in protections, and we've got a bunch of other resources available as well. So just want to end by saying that, you know, there is an opportunity. It's a great opportunity to use technology. It's also an opportunity to make sure that we're using it in the right way with the right safeguards built in. And I'm looking forward to working with more of you in the future to help us all achieve that.